We are officially back. I am officially back here at the Athletic Football Show after a very nice vacation, a very nice break. But I'm very happy to be back, and I'm very happy to be joined by my co-host here at the Athletic Football Show. It's Derrik Klassen. Derrik, how you doing, man?
I'm doing great. It's good to have you back. I mean, yeah, we had some fun, where the kids were running the show here for a little bit, and it was great. But I mean, it's been at least 2 weeks since we've recorded a podcast together, so I'm pretty excited to get back into it.
I am as well. You did a great job. I went back and listened to the Deontay episode this morning. You're a natural. You took to it well. I appreciate you guys really holding it down while I was gone. My wife and I, again, this job, you can really only travel one time of the year, and we like to get away for a little bit, and we had a phenomenal time. We saw just a staggering amount of Spain. I mean, we went all around the country for like 2.5 weeks and just saw so much cool stuff and really, really enjoyed it. And, trying to make up a little bit for lost time with the lack of traveling I did for a few years. And so the chance to get away, it's a lot easier when I know that the house is being tended to well. And I know you guys were going to do a great job. And so thank you very much for taking on more work while I was gone. It is deeply appreciated on my side of things.
Yeah, of course. Am I putting you on the spot asking for any highlights from the trip?
Oh my God. It's hard to say, man. I mean,
that's what I
it's
imagine.
All so different. It's all so different. Like we spent 4 days in San Sebastian and then took a train down to Madrid. We're there for 2 days. And then we drove all the way down into like Andalusia in the southern part of the country. So Granada, Cordoba, Sevilla, and then we flew to Mallorca for 4 days, Mallorca's incredible. I mean, just absolutely beautiful. And so we got to kind of slow down there for a couple days. And then we flew to Barcelona and we went to a music festival like the first night that we were there. So we woke up in Mallorca and then I was seeing Caribou at Primavera Sound the next day. And then we were seeing Charlie XCX at 2 a.m. in Barcelona. Like we did a little bit of everything over.
That's some whiplash.
That was the nice part about it though, is that there was a little bit of everything and we got to calm down when we wanted to. So it was truly like one of the trips of our lifetime. Like I'll remember this very fondly for a very, very long time. And so we do it for our anniversary. So our anniversary is Memorial Day weekend. And so the last 2 years we've gotten to take big trips for our first and second anniversaries. And again, I feel very fortunate to be able to do that. And this was another one where it was a truly special trip. So I appreciate you asking, and I appreciate you guys, being willing and able to take care of things while I was gone for a little bit.
Yeah, doing our best. Can't say I was, chilling on a beach or seeing Charlie XCX, but we were having a good time here.
I'm sure you guys were. You did a great job with Deontay. It was good to have him back on. I missed some stuff while we were gone, and I knew this was going to happen. The way that the calendar falls, there are OTAs when I take this vacation each year, and there's stuff to pick up and scoop up when we get back into town, and that's what we're going to do today. So some of this is a little bit dated. Some of this has happened over the last couple weeks, but because you guys were doing shows that were kind of more singularly focused on one subject, I wanted to just take today to scoop up all of the little bits of news that we got from pretty much all of the OTA practices, obviously some pretty big blockbuster type moves that have happened. So that's what we're going to do today. We're just going to hit about 10-ish items of news that have crept out over the last 2 weeks or so and kind of cover all of our bases from what the newsworthy stuff from OTAs has looked like.
Yeah, you get back from Spain and you immediately are confronted with Aaron Rodgers. How does that feel?
Inevitable. I knew at some point this was going to happen. I figured it would happen while I was gone. And, June 1st obviously is a big day in the NFL calendar. There weren't as many veteran moves after June 1st as we might have expected. We'll obviously talk about Jaire Alexander here in a second. He was released this morning. We're recording this on Monday. But the fact that Rodgers signed during that part of the calendar, I'm not necessarily surprised. I am glad that it was sort of in the back half of things so we could justifiably talk about it today and not have it be like 2.5-week-old news.
If anything, I'm actually mildly surprised it happened this early. So good on them and good for the Steelers, I suppose, in that respect.
1 year, $13.7-ish million, $10 million guaranteed. There are incentives that can take it up to like $18 or so million. Is there anything about this that you find notable or surprising, or is this pretty much what you sort of expected, maybe other than how quickly it happened in the timeline overall?
Yeah, other than me expecting Aaron Rodgers to have drawn this out for a little bit longer to do whatever it is that he does at this time of year. That's really the only part of this that is surprising to me. And I understand that I should care about a signing like this, and I understand that I am paid money to care about a signing like this, but there is just nothing about this that got me moving. we've talked about it before that I didn't love this fit. I thought they should have got for Cousins and all that stuff. So not surprised at any of the way that this unfolded, other than maybe, the date of it happening. But I wanted to somehow talk myself into this, that like I could get like 5% more excited for the Steelers, and I just don't really think I can.
You look at the number and you look at what he's getting paid this year. It really is just a multi-time MVP, surefire Hall of Fame markup on the other 1-year stopgap starting deals that we've seen this year. Like, it's really just a respectful upgrade on the Daniel Jones contract. Like, that's essentially what we're talking about with what the Steelers are paying Aaron Rodgers here.
Yeah, it's just they're paying him that there's like $6 million of that money is just like, you've done it before, even though we haven't seen it in 3 years at this point. And he's a little bit older. He's got the injury stuff. It's just a lot of what he's getting paid for is stuff that he's done before, which is kind of funny in a lot of ways for a Steelers organization that I think is living off of a reputation of stuff that they have done before and not done recently, which is why I think in a lot of ways this pairing is pretty artistic.
I'm not sure how much more the Cousins move or a Cousins move would have moved me or made me more compelled by what this is going to look like. Probably would have been in the same general range. I think that where they are right now with the position, they're obviously backed into a corner. There are only so many moves they could have made this offseason, whether that be Matthew Stafford or bringing back Justin Fields or doing something like this. And there was reported earlier today, I think it was Pro Football Talk, said that Rodgers was their third option and Stafford and Fields were the first two. Well, I guess kinda, right? Like, I'm sure Matthew Stafford would have been a lot of teams' first option if they could have gotten
really
him.
Count.
And then they knew Justin Fields, and he's a little bit younger, so I think potentially exploring that makes sense. But I think, again, in a post-Stafford world, a lot of the moves you could have made at quarterback this offseason fell into the same general range. Like, I think that Jonnu Smith is the guy that moved teams this year that I'm probably the most excited about in terms of what he could do for your short-term ceiling. Other than that, there were a lot of like, okay, I guess this is what you'll have to do given the market, followed by a shrug. And the Rodgers thing kind of falls in line with that to me. I'm not overly excited about it, but I'm also not going to be critical of it because I don't think there were that many other doors that were unexplored that would make me feel differently about the Steelers than I do in a post-Rodgers move sort of world.
On the field, I think I agree. Like, it probably is the same tier as whatever you're going to get from Kirk Cousins at this point, even though that's what I would have wanted, or even Justin Fields. It's just the thing is like, I would rather have Justin Fields or Kirk Cousins in my building at this point. Yeah. It's like, especially Fields, because you know that it could be for a little while longer, whereas at least with Cousins, it might not be for any longer than you would have Rodgers. But I think from that perspective, that's why I struggled with it. But like in terms of on the field, you're probably going to get quarterback 20. Your running game will be a little bit better, and you'll be functional.
I went back this morning after the signing, and I was like, I'm going to do just a little bit of a refresh on how I feel about Aaron Rodgers in 2025. What did he actually look like in the back half of last year? And it looked a lot like he was in the end of his Green Bay tenure. And I mean that in this way. When we were talking about Rodgers heading into last year, I think we did it as one of the lingering questions heading into last season. Was like, okay, what was Aaron Rodgers for real the last time we saw him play football? And it was a lot of, I don't really have any interest in that. That was the style of play that we saw from him. And that's pretty much what it looked like last year. Like, you watch him play, and it's pretty much go balls, slot fades, and access throws. Like, that's what he's doing right now. And a couple of the numbers that bear that out. If you look at it, like middle of the field intermediate throws. So throws where in theory you kind of have to read stuff out. He was in the bottom 3 of all starters that had at least 350 dropbacks last year. So he's not doing it very often. He's also one of the worst quarterbacks in the league when he does do it, if you look at the efficiency numbers. And the number that really jumped out to me, he had the 3rd highest percentage of his throws, according to Next Gen Stats last year, that happened in under 2.5 seconds. The only guys ahead of him were Tua and Joe Burrow. And then you look at the efficiency numbers associated with that. There were 26 quarterbacks last year who had at least 350 dropbacks. Rodgers ranked 24th in EPA per dropback on quick throws last year. With Burrow and Tua, this is in service of good offense for the most part. It needs to happen that way because that's the best version of your passing game in Cincinnati and Miami, respectively. With Rodgers, it's just like, I don't really want to do this anymore. And so I just don't know how or when that changes or if it changes. Because heading into the Jets thing, it was like, okay, if he's more invested, are we going to see a willingness to read stuff out more and actually play the play rather than him just spitting the ball to the perimeter or getting rid of it really quickly, which was kind of the case at the end in Green Bay. Well, now we're going on like year 2.5 of that. And I don't think we're going to, how much more incentive does he heading into his age 42 season have to not play that way anymore? So I just don't even know what the best case scenario of this looks like, given a huge sample size of what we've gotten from a healthy Aaron Rodgers the last 2 full seasons we've seen him play.
That's kind of what I struggle with. And again, to bring up the Kirk thing for the millionth time, I think Kirk Cousins would have liked playing in the Arthur Smith style of offense. Aaron Rodgers, I think we know, fought Matt LaFleur for a while on finally getting there. And then I think at the end of Green Bay, even, they had a little bit of contention. And then with the Jets, it wasn't that style of offense at all. It went back to the Aaron Rodgers where it's slot phase and access throws, and we're throwing stick 8 times a game for some godforsaken reason. Like, it turned into that style of offense. And I just don't really see that style of receiving core in Pittsburgh. That just doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me.
It's the opposite of that.
Exactly. Like, DK Metcalf is like not that player at all. And like, the sell with DK Metcalf in theory is like, okay, Aaron Rodgers is still a good deep thrower, and DK Metcalf is a good down the field receiver. Okay, well, you tried that formula last year with Russell Wilson and George Pickens, and like, to what gain? Like, it didn't really get you anything. And so I think the only way that this works out, the Steelers really, really wanted to, and Aaron Rodgers plays a slightly different way, is if somehow, some way, this young offensive line turns into like a top 5 unit in the league, which there's like a 2% chance that happens. And even if I'm high on a lot of these guys, it's just like, you're asking for a lot out of those young pieces.
We're doing 2 more lingering question shows over the next couple weeks. And I don't want to step on this too much because we are going to do a Steelers one in the final iteration of those shows, our 4th one, which will run next week. And I think the central question for me with the Steelers, when we talk about their ceiling this year with Aaron Rodgers, is how good are the rest of the Steelers? And to me, that's a question worth exploring. Because if you're trying to build the case here, the offensive line is a very good place to start on offense. If that can be a very good group and they run the ball efficiently and Rodgers can sort of be a role player in all of this, maybe you could start to build a case. But I think the most important point, the most important place you can start for what the Steelers can accomplish in 2025 is the defense is like an earth-shattering unit and the offense doesn't have to be very good. And I guess I just have some real questions about how viable that sort of build and that sort of path is, given what we've seen from the Steelers defense recently. But again, I don't want to step on that too much because I think that's going to be the crux of the conversation that we have next week.
There's that. And then the last thing I'll say is like, that was the sell with him and Robert Saleh in New York. And then that's not how that unfolded.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the Jets defense was very good for a couple years. The Steelers at least have like a multi-year track record of being good on defense. Yeah. So I think it's a little bit less fragile. And I think that's the other point that's worth making for me. With the Jets, the wholesale way they gave him control and say within the building, it could get rotted really quickly in ways that just aren't possible in Pittsburgh. Even if there are some acrimonious, not so great working relationships that occur for this 1 year, I don't think that you're going to have like splintering in the foundation of the wood in the way that you did with the Jets because of how much oxygen he was able to keep, like, soak up there. So I think the downside cases, there's a little bit of protection from that make me think this is more worthwhile for the Steelers than it might be for a more vulnerable organization overall.
That's a good point. Even for as much as the Rodgers thing might be interesting, I don't think Tomlin's getting fired in week 7 and then the defense is going to crumble. That probably won't happen. That's a good point.
Let's stick with, speaking of interesting personalities that used to play with Aaron Rodgers, let's talk about Jaire Alexander here. The Packers ultimately release Jaire Alexander. Some reports today that they had tried to trade him this offseason. Teams were not willing to take on what had become a pretty big base salary for Jaire this year. So now he's just gone. $7 million in dead money this year, $9 million next year, obviously as a post-June 1st cut. Frees up $17 million in cap space this year for the Packers. And next year, you look at it, they have $46 million in space now We can talk about how they might try to use that functionally when you consider in-season moves. Maybe that's closer to like 30 to 33 million. And they don't have much cap space next year. Before the Jaire move, they were over the cap. So now they have about 7 million. So my assumption is they'll want to roll over a good chunk of this to give them something to work with next year, considering how few worthwhile ways there are to use that cap space outside of Trey Hendrickson right now. But a little bit surprising that ultimately they couldn't get anything done on the trade market, and this is how it ends between Jaire Alexander and the Packers.
I am a little bit surprised that it had to be a cut instead of, again, there are still a lot of cornerback needy teams, because there's another cornerback we're going to talk about here later, but I've got to like 10 different teams that might still need a cornerback at this state in the calendar. So I am a little bit surprised nobody wanted to jump the list a little bit.
Well, the thing is, what if you can just sign him after he's
a lot of
released,
money,
and you don't have to give up anything, even if you're only paying a portion of the salary? I think that Packers, as it sat, after signing Nate Hobbs, they still have Bullard, they still have Keyshawn Nixon. I think that there was probably a lot of teams around the league that just assumed he was going to get released if they couldn't come to some sort of conclusion or some sort of resolution, and that's ultimately what happened. The question now is what happens for some of these teams and what the price tag looks like, because I don't know what the comparison would be. Darius Slay got $10 million this year, deep into his 30s, but Darius Slay has been a lot healthier than Jaire Alexander has been. He's playing 7 games a year. So even at 28, that sort of availability, is this something closer to like what Trey White got from the Rams last year coming off of an injury? Is it something in the middle? And so that is going to be an important factor here when we talk about the teams that can sign him, because let's say you do something like 1 year, 10 million, and you put like 4 void years on it. And so it's like $3 million against the cap this year, similar to like what the Ravens did with Odell a few years ago, even though that was 15. That means most teams in the league, in theory, could potentially sign him even at this stage of the calendar. And I think you're right. I mean, I think we can list some teams off here. There are probably at least 8 or 10 that I think you can make a compelling case for right now, that it's at least worth exploring him for competition and potentially depth if you can get him at the right price, because there's just not a ton of downside.
Yeah, there's a lot of teams that should be poking around, especially too, like you said, if you can like manipulate the contract a little bit to make him not very expensive, because he's already not going to be very expensive, because again, he's averaging like 6, 7, 8 games a season over the past, I think, 3 years where he just hasn't been very healthy. To me, the teams I'm looking at are like the Rams. Obviously, this is kind of the market they like to dip in for corners anyway. It's like either we're going to take like a 6th round pick, or we're just going to like swing for the fences a little bit on a weird free agent like this. I think the Vikings still make a lot of sense. I think like their cornerback room could still use a little bit of help. And then the Cowboys. And the Cowboys would be tricky because Diggs is coming off of an injury. Shavon Ravel is coming off of an injury from college, and then Alexander would be coming off an injury. So you'd have a bunch of guys who are not particularly healthy, but at that point, it's like someone's going to be fine for us at the end of the year, and you kind of need depth and help anyway. So
I think there's even more than that if you want to keep listing off teams. I think those are all on my list. I think the Eagles are a team that I would throw out there. If they would rather have if they just want to have a discount on what Darius Slay was for them last year, and they don't feel super comfortable with Keely Ringo and whatever that competition looks like at the other outside corner spot, do they want to go this direction? I think that's a team I'd throw out there. The Raiders are a team that I would throw out there just based on need. There's a chance that the Raiders just say, we want to give the young guys opportunities and we don't want to step on that. I think that's a totally fair position to take. But even if you want to use one corner spot to do that, the other one still needs addressing too. Like Eric Stokes is penciled in there right now.
And the only reason with the Raiders, I would almost wonder if they don't want to do that, is like Patrick Graham's been there, man. He knows who's in the building. Like, does he even want to give any of the more young guys a shot? Like, or is he at the point where he's like, okay, I've seen enough of some of these guys. Let's go try and see if we can get 12 games out of Jaire Alexander.
So I think that's going to be a team worth, if you wanted to watch just based on need. I think the Cowboys and the Vikings were also on my list. I would throw the Falcons out there, a team that has some win now, motivations, and I think has a little bit of urgency. Right now, with Mike Hughes, I think is still penciled in another outside corner spot. They didn't pay him a ton. They paid him that classic, if we have to do this, we can do it contract, but we don't, if there's another option, maybe we explore it. The Panthers are a team out there out there. Mike Jackson signed essentially the same Mike Hughes contract this offseason for their other outside corner spot. The Seahawks, they were in the Rasul Douglas market. They chatted with him a little bit recently. All of these former Packers. And we talked about them needing another outside guy potentially to move Spoon full-time into the slot and not have to worry about that. The Rams and then the Niners are the other team that I would throw out there. I think the Niners could still probably use a little bit of outside corner help, even though they signed Trey Brown this offseason. So I think there are plenty of teams at the right price that you could talk yourself into it. If you can get it at the right price and you can mitigate whatever disaster it would be if you only played like 6 or 7 games and you think the swing is worth it, along with, let's call it an interesting personality fit, right? Like, he's just an interesting character to bring into your building. Not like a malicious character necessarily.
No, he's just one of one.
There's been plenty of fun moments from Jaire Alexander over the last several years where it's like, oh, there's just nobody like this guy. So the injury stuff plus that, if you can get him for $4, $5, $6 million, and if you can get the cap number really low, it just feels like it's probably worth a swing for some of these teams that have real ambitions in 2025 and still don't have that second corner spot locked down in the way they probably want to.
That's why I think he probably is going to end up being on one of these teams that are like the fringe wild card, but feel kind of desperate for one reason or another. That's why I think the Falcons make a lot of sense. Cowboys are not necessarily in that, but like the Cowboys do need to do any move to get their defense back into where it was. So I think those are the teams that I'm kind of looking at. And then again, you mentioned the 49ers. I think that's a really good one. Like Trey Brown has been on and off like a really good replacement level player for a number of teams at this point, but he's kind of in that tier of like, if we can find another option, that would be nice.
Falcon, it just feels like something the Falcons would do based on what the Falcons have done over the last couple years. And so, and yeah, there's a couple other guys still out there, like Rasul Douglas, I believe, is still out there. So there are some veteran solutions if you don't go out and get a Jaire Alexander, but I wouldn't be surprised if any of those 10 teams that we just said ultimately do this. One of the kind of reactions to this has kind of been, I wonder, are we surprised that Packers didn't do more at corner in free agency in the draft if this was a possibility? I wasn't looking at it that way. Like, I just always assumed he wouldn't be on the team in one way or another. I always thought he was kind of a bonus in the way that they were building it. And them, what they got from Javon Billard in the slot last year with Evan Williams at safety, I think now you're in a spot where it's Keyshawn Nixon and Nate Hobbs outside with Javon Billard in the slot, and that's what the secondary is going to look like when their best 5 are out there.
I think that's absolutely what it's going to look like. And I still have some questions about how well that's going to go, because I still think Nixon, I mean, they kind of stumbled into him being a corner at all for them. Like, he was pretty much a return specialist when he got there, and then it was kind of just a matter of like, okay, a bunch of guys, including Jaire Alexander, continued to get hurt, and they had to throw him out there, and he's been serviceable, but I am a little bit surprised that they got to the point where they kind of felt all they needed to really do was add Nate Hobbs into the mix this offseason, and that they were going to be okay.
Yeah, so I'm not surprised that they're comfortable rolling with that group, because it did seem like it was kind of pointing that direction. The one other kind of tangent, arm off of this is the Jalen Ramsey part of it, because you mentioned the Rams. I've just kind of pushed them to the side because I just assume they're going to work something out with Jalen Ramsey. But as we keep going further into June, maybe that becomes a little bit murkier. I wonder what's holding this up now that the money is no longer an issue. Like, the moment that June 1st hit, they could trade him and all of the financial machinations of it would look the same. So I'm curious why maybe we have a couple barriers to this that maybe we aren't seeing right now. I still anticipate him getting moved, and I still just feel like the Rams are probably the most logical spot based on their familiarity with him and what that other outside cornerback spot still looks like for this team.
Yeah, I wonder if there's just a bidding war. I mean, he is far and away the best defensive back any team can add to their roster at this stage, and he's going to be expensive, so that's going to complicate it. He's also on the wrong side of 30, but where I think that gets interesting with Ramsey is he's talked about this for a long time in his career. Like, when he starts to fall off as a corner, he's probably going to be fine as a safety. And so even if what you're paying him now would be pretty expensive for a safety, the idea of the cornerback cliff doesn't really scare me with him in a way that it would for Rasul Douglas, Darius Slay, Jaire Alexander, all these other guys. So even though he's expensive, I really think there probably is a bidding war, because again, I don't think any other defensive back on the market can change your secondary the way that Ramsey can, because one, he's still a good outside corner. If you want to move him back to the nickel, I'm sure you could absolutely do that. And then truthfully, if this is the year you want to move him to safety, I don't know how open he is to that right now, but that is still on the board. So I'm again, you mentioned the Rams. They're absolutely on the table. I don't know if the Cowboys would be this aggressive, but they should think about it. The Raiders, I think, should think about it. And I've mentioned the Chargers 100 times for being a team that, if they're serious, they should call about Jalen Ramsey.
Yeah, there's no massive base salary sitting there for Jalen Ramsey. So I wonder like what the financial conversations are like, because I don't know, Miami taking some of that on doesn't seem as important with that current structure as it would for something like Jaire Alexander. I truly don't know what the sticking points are between Miami and whoever's looking to trade for Jalen Ramsey, but I assume we will have some sort of resolution on that sooner rather than later, even if it's taken a little bit longer than we might have anticipated. The big one that came down, I can't remember where I was. It was, it's going to drive me crazy now. I want to say I was like in Sevilla, and I was looking at my phone and saw it come through, and I was like, oh my God. And my wife was like, what happened? And I was like, Frank Ragnow retired. And she's like, you're ridiculous. She's like, I thought something
about it like he died.
I thought something real happened. And I was like, this is real. This is a big deal. And I was trying to like explain to her why it was a big deal, and like the fact that he was really young, and the Lions are this team that has a lot of ambitions right now, and so it's a big loss for them. And it didn't matter. By the end of the explanation, she was still like, that's an unacceptable reaction for anything that's not earth shattering. And so I felt bad about it and had to apologize.
Yeah, it's one of those things that, like, for us, that's a completely normal reaction. But for anybody else, it's like, short of somebody dying, everything under that is just like, oh, well, you oversold it. I don't really care anymore.
It was it was a very funny way for some to react to something while we were on vacation, but it was shocking, and it's shocking for a few different reasons. One, he's a young player. Frank Ragnow's been in the league for 7 years and still playing at an extremely high level. He's 29 years old, and for him to be a second-team All-Pro player and as important to their current hopes as he is, that's what makes it so surprising. And I think that was my first reaction to it. Outside of, man, playing center and playing offensive line in the NFL is like a daily hellish pursuit, and these guys are just going through so much more physically than we probably could ever understand. And obviously Frank Ragnow has played through ridiculous shit over his career. Other than that reaction, I think the secondary one was, this is why you have to do it while you have a chance. Right? This is why you have to take advantage of these opportunities, because you don't know what's going to happen. Your all-pro center can retire at 29 when you're in the midst of a championship hunt. And even if you feel pretty good about whatever alternatives and contingencies you have in the building are, this is a huge loss for a Lions team that still very much has championship aspirations.
Yeah, this is the like peak thing of like, windows don't really exist in the NFL the way that you think that they exist. Like, the only way that you have a surefire window all the time is basically having like Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen. Like, that's really all that it is. And Jared Goff is great, but he's not quite to that level. And I think, to me, obviously going into this offseason, we knew this was going to be the last year of Ben Johnson. He leaves all that stuff. But so much of why we thought it might be okay is like, okay, well, if you have three pillars of, that lead the intellectual, pillars of all your offense, it's your quarterback, it's your center, it's your offensive play caller. Okay, well, we thought we were going to have two of them, and now two of them are gone instead of two of them being there. And the issue that I have with it is like, okay, we knew Ben Johnson was great. I think almost everybody would say that he's a top 6 play caller probably. And then Ragnow, probably a good case that he was the best center in the league still. And like, so you're losing two guys who were like top 5 at their positions at minimum. And then the only one that you have left is Jared Goff, who is good, but is probably more like 10th at his position, which, like, I know that seems a little bit ridiculous, but like, you are dropping a tier, and when he's the only guy left, I think that's a little bit of an issue. So I don't think we're going to go back to like 2021 Lions offense or anything like that, where we don't have any of these guys and it looks terrible, but it's pretty clear that I think the ceiling of this offense is going to be significantly lower than it has been the last 2.5 years.
Jared Goff has played really, really good football for the last several years. He is not one of those quarterbacks that creates an elite or high-end offense simply by being there. This was an offense that relied on the component pieces to be what it's been over the last few years. And they still have plenty of those pieces, but when you start removing them one by one, the dynamic and the complexion of things really does start to change. And it does feel like that's the direction we're headed. Whether they can recapture that, I don't know. John Morton might be incredible. They might figure something out here with, Graham Glasgow stepping in at center, and Tate Ratledge is really good right away, and Christian Mahogany becomes a hit. Like, their ecosystem and just the overall environment they've created there deserves the benefit of the doubt, but we're really starting to chip away at things here slowly.
I have faith that they'll be fine and not be like it's not going to fall apart in any way. It's just it's hard to see the ceiling anymore. And I think you can even old friend Nate Tice has done a really good job of showing like when Frank Ragnow is off the field, they're really bad, the Lions, versus when he's on the field. I kind of removed it to like, okay, I took away 2021 because that was a fake season, I think, as far as evaluating Jared Goff and stuff. And I just looked at Jared Goff with Frank Ragnow on the field from 2022 to 2024. When Ragnow is on the field, he is tied for second in EPA per dropback with Josh Allen. He is like an MVP level quarterback. And then when you take him off, he drops to 11th in EPA per play, which again is not bad. But so much of this Lions formula over the past 3 years has been like, we might be the best offense in football on any given day. And I think when you remove that, you really, really, really either need some of the other young pieces on the offense to step up, or you need this defense to ascend into something truly special, which even that, again, is going to be hard now that they've lost their defensive coordinator on that side of the ball.
I think that sort of framing is very good and very informative. If you go from being like the third or fourth best offense in the league to the 8th or 10th best offense in the league, you are still very good, but that's a demonstrable difference. When you're watching those two types of units, you feel it. And especially
look at the Niners last year.
Yes, that's another good one. And like, yeah, a team that, again, in that general range, like slightly just outside of the top 10. But if you go from feeling like what the Niners have felt like over the last 3 or 4 years, which is, I think the Lions were in a similar stratosphere to that, to like what the Cardinals have been over the last couple of years, you're still very good, but you feel the gap between those two types of teams. And I think which end of that spectrum the Lions end up on is ultimately going to determine a lot about how the next few years are going to go in Detroit. And now I just think it's becoming a much more uphill climb to stay on the high end of that range.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it's just, and like, again, maybe if they had done something that I thought was going to be an X factor this offseason, like if they had, not to make the joke, but like go out and got some sort of X receiver that would have made me feel better about the offense, that could change stuff. But you look at the way that the offense is constructed, and it's like, it's mostly going to be a lot of the same contributors, unless Tesla is just like insanely good, which for a third round pick, that just feels like you're asking for a lot.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's going to be the difference maker this year. I think it's
at least
more
not
like
this year. Yeah,
we get the version of Jahmyr Gibbs we got in the back half of last year, and he becomes like one of the 5 most electrifying dynamic offensive players in the league. Like, to me, it's just little tiny steps and bits of maturation from their in-house guys. And I think that brings me to what the replacement plan is going to look like. Tate Ratledge was taking a lot of snaps at center during like rookie minicamp, which I think makes sense. You're cross-training guys and you're giving yourself options. But the way that it feels right now to me is that Graham Glasgow, who has played some center before in his career, probably makes the most sense as like the 2025 solution. You keep Ratledge at guard, you keep Mahogany at guard. That still gets your best 5 out there. Like, that's still a good offensive line if the young guys hit, but it's just a different class of offensive line than what we've been dealing with the Lions over the last like 2 years.
That's the thing. You're going from 2 years ago, they were like the biggest, meanest, nastiest interior that you could find, and also had Penei Sewell. And now you're going to a group that is going to be effectively a rookie in Christian Mahogany. I know he played some last year, but like, he's really moving into his first full year as a starter. Graham Glasgow, who has been like a nice replacement level player, but in the way that we've talked about like Patrick McCary for a long time, where it's like you can get away with starting him, but you're probably always looking for another guy. And then Tate Ratledge, who I think we both liked and really liked that they picked him there. But again, first-year offensive lineman who was a second-round pick. He's probably not going to be a Pro Bowl out of the gate the way that they've had some other guys along that interior.
Just a lot more uncertainty with everything associated with the offense. And I think it's okay to acknowledge that as we try to figure out what the Lions are going to be this year. I'll miss watching Frank Ragnow play. Like, independent of the implications of this, I think just acknowledging and recognizing that we're losing like truly one of the best offensive linemen in the NFL, and a guy that at his best was just an absolute badass watch. Like truly one of the baddest dudes in the league for several years, and now it retires at age 29. Just as a football fan, I feel like we're getting robbed of something, but I think that really does tell you how much this had worn on him and how much he felt like he needed to do what was best for him and what was best for his family.
And it's not just that he was very good and with Kelsey out of the picture, probably the best center in the league. It's that centers that big and that strong don't really exist very much. Like he was kind of unique in that sense. Like a lot of centers are usually your undersized guy. That's why you kind of want to put guards next to him. But Ragnow being like that 310, 315, where he could by himself move people if he needed to, just aren't a whole lot of those guys in the league at any given time.
And that's why whatever the replacement plan is, it's going to be a hard cry. It's going to be a tough assignment to be as good as you've been over the last couple of years up front. Sticking in the NFC North here, just getting some contract stuff and just some refreshes on who's upset and who's not and how upset they are. Looking at a couple guys who are seeking out new deals. Elton Jenkins and Micah Parsons were both at OTAs for their respective teams, so I think that's something that's worth acknowledging. Terry McLaurin has not been. He was somebody who left OTAs early because he's upset with his deal. That one's dynamic-wise, and in terms of how you're treating your homegrown stars, the fact that you're bringing in Debo, you're paying Debo, you go out, you get a splashy guy in Laramie Tunsil, and now you're not taking care of a guy who played extremely good football for you and is generally considered like one of the best locker room people in the entire league. That's just something to keep an eye on when we look at these teams that are shifting their aspiration level, right? Like this is a team that it was all gravy last year. Now, the disease of more starts to creep in a little bit. I'm not even saying that applies to Terry McLaurin, but there are just different sorts of things you have to weigh here, and it feels like that's kind of what Washington is working through.
And think about how much Terry McLaurin had to put up with until this year. It's
kind of what I mean. Like it was awful for so many years. He was a good soldier, and now he has a career year with a good quarterback. He looks around the league and is like, look at the deal DK Metcalf just got. I signed mine at the exact same time, the last deal that he signed his. It's probably time for me to get paid here. And so I can understand him being a little bit frustrated by what this offseason has looked like, given all of the he's had to eat over the last several seasons.
Yeah, he absolutely should be. Like, it's not only that, but you make the good point of, like, last year they spent a lot to bring in a lot of guys on defense to, like, help Dan Quinn stuff. And it was a lot of, like, smaller deals, but it was a lot of guys. They just were spending a lot of money. And then this offseason, they make the big blockbuster Laramie Tunsil trade, the Debo Samuel thing. Like, they have spread out a lot of resources to guys who are this new regime's guys and their moves, which Terry McLaurin, for as good as he is, and especially as important as he is to the offense, he is not this regime's guy. Like he had already been there. So like, I wonder if there's just like a weird dynamic going on there. If I was him, I would be pretty pissed off because he is, outside of the quarterback, obviously, pretty clearly the most important player on this offense. And for them to be a little bit like, beating around the bush on trying to get a contract done, I think is a little crazy because he's still young too. Like he's coming off his best year. It's just like, it's just not a whole lot of it makes sense for why you wouldn't pay him.
Again, if Terry McLaurin's in a spot where it's like, you guys want to see what life looks like without me, I'm not sure you want that. I'm not sure you want to live that life based on the current version of the receiving core. And I'm sure he's in a spot. It's like, what else do you want me to do? Right? Like I had my best season when you finally gave me a quarterback. It's probably time for me to get rewarded for that, given what the wide receiver market now looks like. So we'll see how this ends up playing out. But again, I am not surprised necessarily that Terry McLaurin is a little bit frustrated with a lack of movement on that new deal. Speaking of frustration, this is a tough one. You guys recorded a show about quarterback battles, you and Sando, last week that hit on the Daniel Jones, Anthony Richardson situation. And that was before we got news that Richardson is now out what looks like indefinitely with AC joint soreness and will not be practicing anytime soon. So there's a chance we don't really see him until training camp. And why this is kind of a huge deal is that now we're having a second straight offseason where a guy who desperately needs to work and improve is not going to get the opportunity to cleanly do that. And so now, if I'm a Colts fan and I see this, it might be somewhat overzealous, but I'm kind of going into like full-blown panic mode seeing this and now having him with another spring where he is not going to be getting the work that he so desperately needs.
Because of the injuries, I'm getting pretty close to like, this is over, because you make the good point. It's like, it's not just that he's injured. It's that he's a guy who's injured and desperately needs reps, and it's clear that he's not going to get them. And I think at this point, it's pretty fair to say he is just injury prone. And I know that's like such a fickle thing, but he's a guy who was dealing with injuries all the way back into college. Like he had a meniscus tear, he had like a little bit of a hamstring issue. It's never like one huge thing with him. It's like not tearing an ACL or anything, but it's just always this and then it's that. And the way that he runs, he's not very good at the way that we've talked about, like Kyler Murray and Lamar Jackson. They're very good at negating contact and not taking big hits. Anthony Richardson is the opposite of that, where he's very bad at managing his hits, and he takes a lot of big hits, and he really takes that stuff on. And for as much as in certain ways he does look like Cam Newton was bulkier. Like he was a bigger, heavier guy, and he was able to take more hits than I think that Richardson has. And even then, Cam still got banged up all the time. So I think we're getting to a point where unless Richardson dramatically is able to overhaul his health somehow, which I just don't know how that's going to happen, it's hard to see how he's ever going to get the reps to be the player that he wants, which sucks because like I still think he's incredibly talented, and I still think that there were really good flashes that you would want to hold on to, but at a certain point, it's like that might be all that we're going to get.
Yeah, these huge improvements that we've seen from quarterbacks over the last 4 or 5 years, whether it be Josh Allen or Jalen Hurts, guys who've made real strides. A lot of that stuff has come with pretty deep offseason work and detailed offseason work. Like you need to do that. And Anthony Richardson for the last couple off seasons has been trying to do that. Like he's working with the same guys and the same trainers as a lot of these quarterbacks have. But if you're hurt each and every offseason when that work should be happening and you need to close the gap probably more than any other quarterback in the league, you can start to see how that plan starts to short circuit a little bit, and it feels like we're trending in that direction. And, we don't need to talk about Colts season outlooks here on June 9th, given this, but I think a natural reaction to this and a natural kind of counter would be, well, they have Daniel Jones. They have a stopgap here and a backstop if Richardson doesn't play. But what I keep coming back to with Daniel Jones and the Colts is like, how good does Daniel Jones have to be for this regime to save itself? Like, I'm just not sure what that ultimately looks like. Like, if Daniel Jones is so good that you're like a top 12-ish offense with Daniel Jones, I just don't know where that leaves this team. Because even if he's good and your offense is solid, and that's the best case scenario where you're still like a top 12-ish offense, then you're immediately back into the quarterback wilderness that has plagued this team for the last 5 years since Andrew Luck retired. And so I just don't know how good that best case scenario even is if this team can't have Anthony Richardson. Like if he can't play, none of the other outcomes feel pretty good to me.
I think that this is obviously going to feel terrible in the moment, but like if Anthony Richardson can't really go, it would almost be better for the long-term health of the Colts if Daniel Jones was just bad and like they just
but then everybody gets fired.
Well, but that's what I was going to say is like everybody gets fired, but like for the long-term health of the organization, that's probably better. It's just obviously going to feel bad for the people that are in the building. But like, I don't like if Richardson can't go, kind of to your point, there aren't that many high-end scenarios where Jones plays well enough and they don't get fired anyway. Like it becomes a very sticky situation.
Yeah, there's very little that's good on the other side of Anthony Richardson not working out. And I think we probably knew that, right? And as soon as you made that pick, you were essentially tying your fate to how the Anthony Richardson experiment was going to go. And it hasn't gone well so far. And I definitely don't think this is pointing to it going any better. The fact that he can't practice and it's only June.
It just feels so bad that like, I really do think if he was the guy who was able to get consistent reps, that he could have figured this out. But his entire NFL career, it's been him trying to get off the ground. Because it's one setback and then it's another and then it's another. And like, if you only have like these 6-week chunks at any given time where you're trying to figure stuff out, it's like, okay, you can learn all this stuff and then, okay, I'm off the field for another 3-4 weeks, or I'm off the field for the rest of the season. It's like, how are you ever supposed to get consistent experience? And so it's unfortunate. I really did like this player, but we're getting to the point where it's hard to see the rosy outlook.
And listen, maybe he comes back in camp and he feels 100% and this ultimately turns around. But I just think this is a pretty dark cloud to already have emerged over your offseason if you're the Indianapolis Colts. Last, bigger sort of news item here was the Bryce Huff trade. Bryce Huff being traded to the Niners for a 2026 mid-round pick. If you look at the cap implications of it, there was an option bonus that the Eagles ultimately did not pick up, so it transitioned to a base salary. They converted like $9 million of that to a signing bonus to spread out some of the money. They're really saving like $7 million in cash if you're the Eagles. There aren't a lot of cap elements to this. The Niners are paying the other $7.5 or so million of his base salary. So that's the other monetary thing to keep in mind here. I think it makes sense for both teams. Like the Niners taking a swing on this and now having a third pass rusher. You can bring Michael Williams along a little bit slower in pure pass rush situations, only paying $7.5 million to do that. And the Eagles just saving the cash, admitting that they made a mistake in the way that they're quick to do often. I think for both teams, this makes a lot of sense given the current makeup of their rosters and what last season looked like.
Yeah, the Niners needed anybody, and like Huff does make sense for a number of reasons. One, I think he's just a much different body than Michael Williams, which I think is cool. And then obviously the only season that Bryce Huff was like a super impact player, that 10-sack season a couple years ago, was with Robert Saleh. So there's a degree of like comfort there, I think, with him potentially, and Saleh's going to know how to use him and how to unlock him. And then last year, like,
he's back in a spot that he's more comfortable with. Like this is just a
exactly.
defense and a scheme where you're now a 4-3 defensive end again. You're going to play in pure pass rush situations, and we're paying you like a situational player and what you probably should have been from the beginning. Like he was fine on a rate basis last year for the Eagles. He just didn't play a lot because I think there were serious concerns about what his limitations were.
And he had like a wrist thing that he was dealing with a little bit last year. So like if he can just be a little bit healthier, and he doesn't even, for this to be a successful signing for the Niners, like he doesn't even have to be a 10-sack guy again. If he can be like a 6-sack guy and just be like, get the pressures on those third downs, that is completely acceptable. It's really all that he needs to be. And I think if I was reading it correctly, I think pretty sure they can move on from him after this year if they want to for like literally nothing. So like if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. Then who cares? Like you didn't even really give up that much for it, unless you really, really value that kind of mid-round pick, which I think where the Niners are at, not a big deal.
And we don't even know what mid-round pick means. Like that could be a 4th-round pick. That could be a 5th-round pick. I have no idea what mid-round pick is. Either way, I feel like this is probably worth doing if you're both of these teams.
Exactly. And the Niners just spent, 4 picks on their front anyway? Like, I'm sure they'll be okay missing one of those for next year.
And again, I think that when you look at what Michael Williams is and what he profiles to be as a rookie, I feel like he's going to be somebody that can immediately contribute on early downs. Like that is his selling point for the high floor version of his rookie season. And I think the pass rush bag is probably going to take a little bit longer to develop. And having a guy like Bryce Huff, who is the inverse of that, where you can situationally use him and not even have Michael Williams on the field for some of those early third downs as he develops that part of his game, I actually think that's a decent outcome for this version of the Niners front.
Or now we could just put Michael Williams over a guard and say, hey, man, run through that guy's chest. Like, don't even think about it. No, do I have to go outside, inside? Nope, just go through that guy's chest. We'll be okay.
Yes, you're putting him in spots where he's going to be positioned to succeed and not have to work through some of those struggles because you have somebody like Bryce Huff, and that's something that I can get behind. I've got like 5 or 6 more of these. We can work through them pretty quickly. I think they're just worth acknowledging because they were news to me as I was looking back through things today, and I'm sure for some people not following the day-to-day news of the NFL, some of them might have slipped through the cracks. This one happened, I believe, yesterday, but Nick Chubb headed to the Texans. We have not seen the numbers on this, which make me think they're probably pretty small. It's a tough situation just because he was coming off of such a devastating injury last year. He did not look very good. The hope is with a little bit more time removed from that injury, we can get something closer to the old version of Nick Chubb. But as he creeps toward 30 and what we got from him the last time we saw him, I think there's a reason he was still available at this point in the calendar. And I think there's a reason that we haven't seen what the numbers on a deal like this look like.
It's the number. The fact that we haven't really seen the numbers makes me think it's low, which makes me think that he's in a pretty tough spot recovery wise. And not that like the recovery is going poorly, just that like he might not have the juice that he had. And it's funny, you can kind of look at it one of two ways. It's like, okay, well, he's come back from a major injury before and been the best running back in the league for a little bit. But kind of like you said, now he's getting closer to 30. This is already something that he's dealt with before. like it's just running backs don't really come back from stuff this late in their career. So I would love if he did, because I think what their Texans are trying to do on offense with a player like Nick Chubb could be awesome. I just don't know how much we're going to get from him.
Sticking in the old NFC or the old AFC North, Rashod Bateman gets an extension from the Baltimore Ravens, a deal that I think looks very palatable given what Rashod Bateman has been over the last couple of years and given the rest of the receiver market. 3 years, about $37 million, $20 million guaranteed. If you look at AAV, it comes in just ahead of Darius Slayton and his deal that he signed this offseason, a little over $12 million a year, 28th overall in AAV among receivers. And it's just behind both the Darius Slayton deal and the Allen Lazard contract a couple years ago in guaranteed money. And based on what Rashod Bateman has been for the Ravens over the last couple years, I think you can feel pretty good about this if you're Baltimore.
I think you definitely should. And like, I know he's had a rocky tenure there, and especially for a long time, his chemistry with Lamar Jackson was bafflingly bad, but I do think last year, like, genuinely, it started to come along. It was a little bit better in the red zone. And then I think what really stood out to me was late in downs, their chemistry was better. Like, it just never seemed like Jackson wanted to throw to him down the field, especially late in the down at any other point in their career. And then finally this year, I don't know if it was extra work in the offseason. I don't know if they had a long heart-to-heart, whatever it was. They really finally clicked this year, and for them to get him at the money that, if you can get him for Darius Slayton money for a guy who's going to be your receiver too, you should absolutely do that.
I also think it's important because Rashod Bateman, we've talked about this a lot, is just a very different player than I anticipated him being coming into the league. But him being more of that downfield target for the Ravens is important because they don't really have another one. Like, that's what he is in the overall formula of the offense. And so he becomes very important to make all the pieces fit together. And the last thing I'll mention here, just on like an efficiency basis, I wanted to read off this list. For players with at least 70 targets last year, here are the leaders in the NFL in EPA per target per True Media. Amon-Ra St. Brown was number 1. Devontae Smith was number 2. Rashod Bateman was number 3. This is among receivers. A.J. Brown, Terry McLaurin, Ladd McConkey, Puka Nacua, Jaden Reed, T. Higgins, Jamar Chase. So on a per-target basis last year, Rashod Bateman, among receivers with at least 70 targets, only Amon-Ra St. Brown and Devontae Smith ranked ahead of him. So he was an incredibly efficient player. And anecdotally, that makes sense. Like, when you think about Rashod Bateman's 2025 season, there were a lot of big-time plays involved in that year.
And honestly, if that's all he can be, whereas like we know what Mark Andrews is going to be on a given snap, and if Hopkins can just be like some degree of stabilizing force for them, and then you just get a handful of big plays from guys like Zay Flowers and Bateman, we're going to be A-okay next year.
It's going to be a fun group to watch this year with Hopkins because apparently he's looked good, in off-season workouts, and they're not paying him a lot. They're not really relying on him to be a huge part of the offense. But I think skill set wise and what he can still do, it does make sense given some of the other pieces. But for that all to come together, Rashod Bateman needs to be part of it. So to see him get rewarded, not surprising, but I do think that's a pretty decent price given what some other guys in that general range of the receiver market have been taking home this offseason. Jonnu Smith. Sounds like the Dolphins are, hoping to hang on to him. There was some trade chatter. He's a little bit unhappy with his deal. The Steelers are potentially in the market for a pass catcher. They were sniffing around, which is hilarious and probably the least surprising thing of all time. The fact that Arthur Smith was trying to get Jonnu Smith again. Drew Rosenhaus came out and said that Smith wants to stay in Miami. So I think just two things worth paying attention to here, like what the resolution is between Smith and the Dolphins, if there is one, and where the Steelers ultimately get their other pass catcher, because after the George Pickens trade, and even before the George Pickens trade, given the types of receivers they had, they need to do something to make good on a 1-year run with Aaron Rodgers. And I don't think I don't think you can say that based on the guys they currently have in the building in Pittsburgh.
No, I don't think so. Like, that's definitely not going to happen. It would be very funny if, I know a lot of the young receivers in Green Bay didn't actually play with Aaron Rodgers because he's been gone for a while, but it would be very funny if they were trading for a former third-round pick from Green Bay to go play with Aaron Rodgers again, where like the whole bit was that he never played with first-rounders in Green Bay, I think would be very funny. But as far as Jonnu Smith goes, I actually don't think he'll get moved. I think this is just one of those things, like, he was coming off of a very good season that I'm sure that he probably didn't anticipate and was trying to see if he could get a little bit more money for that.
Next one here, this is one that I just hadn't seen, and so I figured we would just talk about it briefly because we mentioned it on draft night, like how this was ultimately going to shake out with the Saints taking Kelvin Banks. It sounds like New Orleans is planning on moving Trevor Penning to guard and having Fuaga move over to right tackle and have Banks play left tackle. That feels like a reasonable solution to me, given the guys they have on the roster and given what that other starting guard spot would have looked like, where I believe Dylan Radins would be penciled in to play there if it wasn't Trevor Penning or one of those tackles. So I could easily get behind this, gives Penning like another shot for things to work out. And if it does, and you get real play out of those other two tackles, that suddenly becomes a pretty young, pretty intriguing group for the Saints up front.
Yeah, I like this pairing of what they're doing here, because not only does it keeps Banks at left tackle, which like that just makes things simpler for everybody, simpler for the rookie. You move Fuaga back to right tackle, which is what he played in college. And even though he played admirably on the left side last year, he'll probably be better on the right side. I mean, that's just usually how that stuff goes. And then Penning, his whole,
it makes sense for him. Like it's that part of it, I think totally tracks to me.
He's just a killer. Like he gets hands on you and it's over. And so that's, exactly. Putting him at right tackle, I think makes a ton of sense. And then Penning, his whole issue was, he's actually a pretty functional run blocker, especially, again, when he can just get hands on guys and move them. He's just not great in space. I think he's a little bit clunky. And then in pass protection, he was all over. Okay, well, at guard, theoretically, we can hide some of that stuff a little bit better. And again, you don't know how well that's going to work, but if he can go from just not being a good tackle to being even a replacement level, perfectly fine guard, that's like a win for all three spots here. And I'd be pretty excited about that.
Couple more here. We don't have to spend a ton of time on this. I just love my fact that Mike Macdonald was asked if Sam Darnold was going to be the starting quarterback this year and if there was any scenario where he wouldn't be. And it's like, his response is so great. She's like, I understand that you guys have to ask this, like it's the job. It's a crazy question. And because it is a crazy question, like even if you're not 100% sold on the Sam Darnold experiment in Seattle, what the Seahawks paid Sam Darnold and where they drafted Jalen Milroe, Sam Darnold is going to be the starting quarterback for the 2025 Seattle Seahawks. I think we can all agree on that, even if we want a little bit more drama associated with how that's going to unfold.
Yeah, even for as much as I didn't love that move, we would need like a bottom 5th percentile outcome for the Darnold thing in camp and a top 95th percentile from Jalen Milroe in camp for there to be even a discussion. So it's not happening.
Yeah, this is not a Russell Wilson, Matt Flynn sort of scenario. The payments and the dynamics of this are still very different than a situation like that. 2 injury things to hit before we get out of here, because I do think that they're meaningful based on what these teams are hoping to get from these guys this year. Ricky Pearsall reportedly out until training camp with a hamstring injury. And why this matters is because they're really relying on him this year in a post-Deebo Samuel world in San Francisco. And now we have 2 off seasons in a row where he's really not going to be able to practice as much as you want a young player to practice. Obviously, last summer, there's nothing you can do about that. He gets shot in a freak accident and misses time. But now you have a rookie season that was disrupted by something, and you have a second year where some of that work in the offseason is going to be disrupted. And that's just something that's worth keeping an eye on when we start talking about expectations for the Niners, how this is all going to go. Because remember last year, so much of it was disrupted, whether it was CMC being hurt, Brandon Ayuk with the holdout. So this being a note that the 49ers offseason is starting on again, when they're going to have to rely on Pearsall in a pretty huge way, I think is at least somewhat notable.
It is, and it's not just that he's, replacing the snaps that they're losing from Deebo Samuel. It's that he is the pivot point for them, I think, wanting to be a little bit more of a drop-back team, a little bit more of a throw down the field team. And obviously they went maybe a little bit overboard early last season and how that looked, but I really do think Pearsall is supposed to allow Brock Purdy to do a little bit more of the intermediate, deep drop-back stuff that he wants to do and that Shanahan, I think, clearly thinks he can do. And so the fact that his development this year might be a little bit slowed, I do think is troubling, especially with Brandon Ayuk still kind of up in the air in terms of what we're going to get from him early on.
Talk about guys being hurt and staying hurt. Joey Bosa also dinged up, hurt a calf during OTA workouts. He is going to be out till training camp. And this is another one where it was going to be hard to rely on him to stay healthy for long stretches at this point in his career based on how the last few seasons have went. But they're going to need him. If the Bills are going to be what we want the Bills to be, other than a shocking breakout season from somebody like Landon Jackson or one of the other rookies, like what they paid Joey Bosa and what he looks like in the overall plan they have on defense, they need really good play by Joey Bosa by the end of this season. So the fact that it's June and we're already talking about him being hurt, things could easily get better, but not the way you want to start things with this new pairing of him being in Buffalo.
Yeah, and I like that you said by the end, because thankfully for them, that is really all that's going to matter. Having Josh Allen, having Sean McDermott, having enough other bodies in the front, like they'll be okay through December 20th. After that point, it's like if Joey Bosa isn't healthy, or if he hasn't had you would obviously want him to have some playing time before then too, just so he stays warm and he's ready and he has NFL reps this year. Like, it just, you would hope that he's able to at least play like a handful of games, and they'll probably keep him on a pitch count, I would assume, because they have enough bodies there. But like the fact that you can't even get him into August on the pitch count is a little bit worrisome. But that's
exactly
we knew
where
this
I'm
was going to be. Yeah.
Like, how much does this matter if he ends up being healthy during the season? Not much, but the fact that we can't even get through OTAs without him having to deal with something, not the way that you want to start. All right. That is all we've got for today. We will be back with another mailbag tomorrow. Wanted to tweak things just because of, what the schedule looks like with me getting back and not being around when we typically record the mailbag. So we're going to be recording the mailbag for Wednesday this week, and then we're going to be back with another one on our regularly scheduled time next Monday. So just something to look out for. And programming note, we're back to 4 shows a week. I'm back. We're going to be back throughout the entire offseason, so that's something that you guys can look forward to. This week, we had things pushed back a day, but for the most part, it's going to be Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, all the way through the offseason. We'll talk about things as we get a little bit closer to training camp and I'm on the road, things of that nature. But for at least the next month or so, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, that is going to be our cadence here on the Athletic Football Show. Very happy to be back. Very happy and grateful to everyone who filled in for me while I was gone. We will talk to you guys very soon. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching the Athletic Football Show. Subscribe to the channel to keep up with us. Like and comment on this video, and we'll see you next time.